Screaming alarms echoed through the crystalline halls of the Galactic Council headquarters as emergency lights bathed everything in crimson shadows. Representatives from dozens of species rushed toward the great assembly chamber, their faces twisted with fear and confusion as reports of devastation poured in from the outer rim colonies. Admiral Reth of the reptilian scaleborn race stood at the center of the massive holographic display, his clawed hands trembling as he manipulated the three-dimensional star map that showed 12 red zones where entire worlds had simply vanished from all communications. The silence in the chamber was broken only by the soft whimpering of the amphibious wetland delegates and the nervous chittering of the insectoid hive representatives. "Honored council members," Reth began, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 years of military experience. "What we face today is beyond anything in our recorded history. The Devourers have awakened from their millennial sleep, and they are consuming everything in their path." The hologram shifted to show massive bioorganic ships that moved like living creatures through space, their surface covered in what looked like breathing flesh and pulsing veins. These monstrosities stretched for kilometers in length and seemed to absorb any energy weapons fired at them, growing larger and more aggressive with each battle. Colony 7, Beta was home to 40 million souls just 3 days ago, Reth continued, his voice breaking slightly. Now there is nothing left but empty space and asteroid debris. The Devourers consumed not just the population, but the entire planet itself, leaving only trace minerals floating where a world once spun. A wave of panic swept through the assembled representatives as species after species began demanding immediate military action. The proud warrior race known as the Ironclad banged their metallic fists on their podiums while shouting about honor and glorious battle. The ethereal energy beings called the Luminous flickered frantically as their light forms pulsed with anxiety. In the midst of this chaos sat a single human representative, a middle-aged man with graying hair and calm brown eyes named David Chen. Unlike the other delegates who were standing and shouting over each other, David remained seated at his small observation desk, quietly taking notes on a simple electronic tablet, while occasionally glancing up at the tactical displays. The combined fleets of the Ironclad and Skyborn warrior castes have already engaged the enemy at the outer beacon system, Admiral Reth announced, causing the chamber to fall silent. Both fleets were completely destroyed within 6 hours. We estimate the Devourers now command over 300 bioships, each one larger than our biggest dreadnoughts. The representatives erupted into arguments about defense strategies and evacuation plans. Some called for immediate surrender while others demanded last-ditch military strikes. The usually composed council speaker, a tall and elegant member of the plant-like rootkin species, struggled to maintain order as panic spread like wildfire. "What about the core defense grid?" shouted General Pike of the Ironclad, his metallic voice booming across the chamber. "We have orbital platforms around every major world equipped with planet-killer weapons." "The defense grid has already been tested," Reth replied grimly. "The Devourers simply absorbed the energy from our most powerful weapons and used it to fuel their own growth. Every shot we fire makes them stronger and more dangerous." As the arguments continued, several representatives noticed that the human delegate had not spoken a single word during the entire emergency session. David Chen sat quietly in his corner, occasionally making notes but showing none of the fear or anger that consumed the other species. Finally, Council Speaker Willow of the Rootkin turned toward the human section. "Representative Chen, your species has remained remarkably quiet during these proceedings. What contribution can Earth offer to our collective defense efforts?" The chamber fell silent as hundreds of alien eyes turned toward the lone human. David slowly stood up, straightened his simple gray suit, and cleared his throat before speaking in a calm, measured voice that carried clearly through the vast space. "Honorable Speaker and esteemed council members, I have been in constant communication with Earth Command throughout this session," David began. "My government has reviewed all available tactical data on the Devourer threat, and we have reached a decision regarding our response." He paused for a moment, glancing around at the expectant faces of beings from across the galaxy. "Earth requests immediate access to all current Devourer fleet positions, movement patterns and tactical assessments. We will handle the rest." A stunned silence filled the chamber as the implications of his words sank in. Several representatives began laughing at what they saw as human arrogance. The massive bull-like creatures known as the ground shakers snorted in derision, while the bird-like skyborn species ruffled their feathers in amusement. "Handle it?" General Pike asked incredulously. "Human, your entire species commands perhaps 20 small patrol vessels and a handful of mining ships. The ironclad fleet alone numbered over 800 warships, and they were annihilated in hours." David nodded politely. "I understand your concerns, General Pike. However, my instructions are clear. Earth will address the devourer situation using our own methods. We simply require the current tactical intelligence to coordinate our response effectively, Admiral." Reth studied the human with growing confusion. "Representative Chen, I must ask directly, exactly what kind of response can Earth possibly mount against an enemy that has defeated our combined military forces?" "The kind of response humans are particularly good at," David replied with a slight smile. "We have been preparing for threats like this for longer than most species realize. Your tactical data will help us minimize collateral damage to civilian populations during our operations." The chamber erupted into fresh arguments as different species debated whether to share sensitive military intelligence with what they considered a minor species. Some representatives worried about human motives while others questioned their sanity. As the debate raged around him, David quietly activated his tablet and sent a brief message through quantum encryption channels. "Package confirmed. Dance partners identified. Music will begin shortly." The message disappeared into the void, traveling faster than light toward a small blue planet on the edge of council space. Unknown to the panicking representatives around him, similar messages were being transmitted to dozens of locations throughout human-controlled space. In hidden shipyards and secret military installations, personnel who had been waiting patiently for decades began their final preparations. The time for humanity to reveal its true nature had finally arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. Deep within the archives of the Galactic Council building, automated systems began retrieving classified files that had been sealed for 5 decades. The inquiry came from Admiral Reth himself, who needed to understand why humanity had been restricted from full council membership and what their true capabilities might be in the current crisis. The first file that materialized in the holographic display showed a much younger version of Earth, with primitive nuclear-powered vessels making their initial contact with council scouts near the Jupiter mining stations. What started as a peaceful first contact scenario quickly escalated when human military vessels appeared within hours of the initial meeting, displaying coordination and response times that shocked the council observers. Dr. Ann Walsh sat in her small laboratory aboard Research Station Echo, analyzing soil samples from newly discovered worlds when her personal communicator chimed with an encrypted message from Earth Command. The message was brief, but carried the highest priority classification she had ever seen. Operation Shepherd activating. Report to designated coordinates immediately. Classification level Phoenix. Anne had spent 15 years working alongside alien researchers, carefully maintaining the facade that humans were simply another peaceful species interested in scientific cooperation. Her colleagues from various species treated her with polite condescension, often explaining basic concepts as if she were a child, never suspecting that her doctorate in xenobiology was supplemented by extensive training in military intelligence. The archived files revealed the true reason for humanity's restricted status within the Council. 50 years earlier, when Earth had first encountered the galactic community, human representatives had been invited to demonstrate their military capabilities as part of the standard integration process. What they showed the Council had caused immediate fear and resulted in humanity being classified as a dangerous species requiring containment. In the recordings, Council observers watched in horror as human warships engaged in combat exercises that violated every known rule of civilized warfare. Where other species fought with honor codes and ceremonial traditions, humans demonstrated brutal efficiency that prioritized victory over glory. Their weapons were designed not to disable enemies, but to completely eliminate threats with overwhelming force. The files showed human ships using tactics that other species considered barbaric. Ramming attacks, coordinated swarm formations, and something the Council termed nuclear saturation bombardment. The practice of using atomic weapons not as last resorts but as standard operating procedure. Most disturbing to the Council was humanity's apparent lack of moral restraint when facing existential threats. These beings fight not for honor or glory, one archived report noted, but for the complete annihilation of anything they perceive as a threat to their survival. They show no mercy, follow no traditional combat protocols, and appear to view warfare as a problem to be solved rather than a noble contest between warriors. Anne received clearance codes that allowed her to access restricted human databases for the first time in her career. What she discovered made her hands shake as she realized the scope of the deception her species had maintained. The research stations and mining operations that humans operated throughout Council space were actually sophisticated military installations disguised as civilian facilities. Every human scientist, trader, and diplomat in Council space had been carefully selected and trained for a dual purpose. While they genuinely performed their civilian duties, they were also gathering intelligence on alien military capabilities, mapping strategic resources, and establishing supply chains that could support military operations when needed. The archived testimonies from alien military leaders painted a picture of their fear. Human combat doctrine appears to be based on the assumption that any enemy will attempt to destroy them completely. Therefore, they must destroy the enemy first and with maximum efficiency. They do not fight to defeat, they fight to exterminate. Anne's access codes revealed the truth about Earth's small military presence in space. What the Council believed to be 20 patrol vessels was actually a screening force designed to maintain the illusion of human weakness. The real Earth defense fleet had been under construction in hidden facilities for decades, incorporating technology reverse-engineered from every species they had encountered. The most damning file in the EE Council archives contained recordings of human military exercises conducted in secret. These showed tactics that made even the warrior species uncomfortable. Coordinated strikes designed to maximize civilian casualties in enemy populations, the use of biological weapons tailored to specific alien physiologies, and contingency plans for the complete sterilization of hostile worlds. Their entire approach to conflict is fundamentally incompatible with civilized warfare. Read one military assessment. They appear to believe that showing mercy to enemies will be interpreted as weakness, leading to future conflicts. Therefore, they prefer to eliminate threats so completely that no future retaliation is possible. Anne realized that her work analyzing alien biology had not been purely scientific. The genetic profiles and physiological data she had gathered on dozens of species could be used to develop targeted weapons that would affect only specific alien races. Her research on alien psychology and social structures could inform military strategies designed to cause maximum disruption to enemy societies. The Council's decision to restrict humanity had been based on a simple calculation. Any species capable of such efficient destruction needed to be contained before they could threaten galactic stability. They offered Earth limited colony rights and research opportunities in exchange for agreeing to maintain only a minimal military presence in Council space. What the Council never understood was that humans viewed this arrangement as temporary. Every human in Council territory was part of a long-term intelligence operation designed to gather information that would be invaluable if conflicts ever arose. They had spent 50 years studying their potential enemies while presenting themselves as harmless academics and traders. Anne's communicator chimed again with new orders. She was to maintain her cover for exactly 72 more hours, while other human assets throughout Council space prepared for activation. After 5 decades of careful preparation, humanity was finally ready to reveal what they had been building. In the darkness beyond the Council's knowledge, as she began destroying sensitive research materials and preparing her cover story for suddenly leaving the station, Anne reflected on the irony of the situation. The Council had restricted humanity to prevent them from becoming a threat, not realizing that this restriction had given humans both the motivation and the opportunity to become a far greater danger than they had ever been before. The archived files concluded with a prophetic warning from the original Council assessment team. If humanity ever decides that the Council itself represents a threat to their survival, their response will be swift, coordinated, and absolutely devastating. We can only hope that day never comes. The first warning came from the deep space monitoring stations orbiting the core worlds, when massive gravitational anomalies appeared simultaneously across 17 star systems. Captain Rex of the Skyborn species was reviewing routine patrol, reports when his ship's sensors began screaming with alerts that defied all known physics. The bioships emerged from what appeared to be living wormholes, their organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that hurt to look at directly. Unlike the mechanical vessels that populated Council space, these devourer craft seemed to breathe and shift their shapes as they moved, adapting their forms in real time to optimize for whatever task they were performing. Rex had commanded the elite Skyborn Defense Squadron for 12 years and had never seen anything that moved through space like these creatures. They didn't fly so much as swim through the vacuum, their movements fluid and predatory as they approached the heavily populated world of Haven, home to over 2 billion souls from dozens of different species. All units, maintain defensive formation and prepare to engage, Rex commanded through the tactical network, his feathered crest rising with the adrenaline surge that preceded combat. Around him, 300 of the Council's most advanced warships arranged themselves in the traditional battle formations that had protected civilization for centuries. The first exchange of fire revealed the horrible truth about the Devourers. The Council's energy weapons, designed to overwhelm shields and disable enemy vessels, were absorbed by the bioships' living hulls like sunlight absorbed by plants. Not only did the weapons fail to cause damage, but the alien vessels actually grew larger and more aggressive as they fed on the energy. Impossible, Rex whispered, as he watched his squadron's most powerful plasma cannons strike the lead Devourer ship. Instead of the expected explosion, the organic hull simply rippled and expanded, growing new appendages that looked disturbingly like feeding tentacles. The Devourer's counterattack came not as directed energy beams or missile salvos, but as clouds of something that looked like metallic spores. When these clouds made contact with Council ships, they began dissolving the hull plating at a molecular level, while simultaneously converting the matter into more bioorganic material. Rex watched in horror as the proud dreadnought Starborn Glory was consumed within minutes. The massive vessel's crew of 800 beings had no time to evacuate, as their ship was literally digested around them. The Devourer responsible for this atrocity grew noticeably larger as it absorbed both the ship and its occupants. All squadrons, fall back to secondary positions, Rex ordered, abandoning a lifetime of tactical training that emphasized holding ground at all costs. Against enemies that grew stronger from every attack, traditional military doctrine was not just useless but counterproductive. The retreat became a rout as more bioships appeared through living wormholes throughout the system. Each new arrival seemed larger and more sophisticated than the last, as if the Devourers were learning and adapting their designs based on what they encountered. Some ships developed new weapon systems during the battle itself, growing organic cannons that fired streams of the same dissolving spores planet Haven's orbital defense platforms. Massive installations that could crack moons with their firepower proved equally useless. The bioships simply attached themselves to the platforms like parasites and began converting the weapon systems into more organic components. Within hours, the planet's defenses had been turned into feeding stations for the enemy fleet. On the planet's surface, panic spread faster than the evacuation ships could launch. Millions of beings crowded spaceports and transportation hubs, desperate to escape before the Devourers reached the surface. The lucky few who managed to board evacuation vessels often found themselves pursued by smaller bioships that seemed designed specifically for hunting fleeing prey. Rex made the hardest decision of his military career when he realized that continued resistance was only making the enemy stronger. He ordered all remaining Council forces to cease fire and focus entirely on civilian evacuation. The shame of abandoning a fight went against every instinct his warrior species possessed, but watching friends and allies being consumed to fuel enemy growth was unbearable. The final phase of the battle began when the largest Devourer bioship, a creature the size of a small moon, positioned itself in Haven's upper atmosphere and began extending massive feeding tubes toward the planet's surface. The sight of these organic appendages descending like twisted lightning bolts toward population centers broke the last remnants of organized resistance. Rex's final transmission before evacuating the system was picked up by monitoring stations throughout Council space. To all who receive this message, conventional warfare is useless against these entities. They consume everything: matter, energy, even the electromagnetic signatures of our communications. Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. Save who you can and run. Similar scenes played out across the core worlds as the Devourer fleet divided into hunting packs and attacked multiple systems simultaneously. The industrial world of Forge Prime, manufacturing center for Council military equipment, was consumed so completely that even its 2 moons were reduced to digestible components. The agricultural paradise of Green Valley, food supplier for dozens of species, became a wasteland of organic conversion chambers in the Council chambers. Representatives watched real-time feeds of the destruction with growing desperation. Worlds that had stood for millennia were disappearing from star charts as if they had never existed. The proud military traditions of species like the Ironclad and Groundshakers meant nothing against enemies that converted defeats into evolutionary advantages. Communication networks began failing as the Devourers consumed the relay stations that connected the far-flung worlds of the Council. Cut off from reliable information, many systems began surrendering rather than face the same fate as Haven. Entire species abandoned their homeworlds and fled toward the galactic core, hoping to find safety in numbers. David Chen received regular updates on the deteriorating situation through Earth's independent communication network, but his reports to the Council remained optimistically vague. When pressed for details about Earth's promised military response, he simply stated that human forces were moving into position and would engage the enemy at the optimal moment. The truth was that humanity had been tracking the Devourer approach for weeks before the first attacks. Deep space monitoring stations disguised as research facilities had detected the gravitational anomalies and alerted Earth Command to the impending threat. Unlike the Council's reactive strategy, humans had been preparing their response based on detailed analysis of enemy capabilities. As the 3rd day of the Devourer onslaught began, over 30 worlds had been consumed, and the Council's remaining military forces were in full retreat. Refugees clogged every available transportation route, while panic-induced riots broke out on worlds still under Council protection. The galactic civilization that had stood for millennia was collapsing in real time. The only calm voice in the chaos belonged to David Chen, who continued taking notes and coordinating with Earth Command through encrypted channels. When questioned about his species' apparent lack of concern for the crisis, David replied simply, "Humans prefer to strike when the enemy least expects it. Patience is often the most effective weapon." The refugee camps scattered across the inner systems had grown beyond all capacity, as millions of displaced beings sought safety from the advancing Devourer fleets. What started as temporary shelters had become sprawling cities of desperation, where different species competed for limited resources and safe passage to the galactic core. Colonel Beth Stone stepped off the transport vessel, Peaceful Harvest, and immediately began assessing the logistical nightmare that surrounded her. The camp on the mining world of Red Rock housed over 3 million refugees from a dozen different species, all requiring different atmospheric conditions, dietary needs, and medical care that stretched the facility far beyond its breaking point. "Ma'am, the wetland refugees in Sector 7 are developing respiratory problems from the dry atmosphere," reported Lieutenant Sam Torres, consulting a tablet that displayed the endless stream of humanitarian crises that demanded attention. "The Hive representatives are requesting separate quarters because their pheromone communications are being disrupted by proximity to the luminous energy beings." Beth nodded, while her eyes scanned the organized chaos of the distribution center. To any observer, she appeared to be nothing more than a dedicated humanitarian worker, managing relief operations. The truth was far more complex. Every movement, every conversation, and every supply delivery was part of a carefully orchestrated intelligence-gathering operation. The aid supplies being distributed from human vessels contained more than food and medical equipment. Hidden among the relief materials were sophisticated monitoring devices designed to gather data on alien physiology, social structures, and technological capabilities. Each interaction with refugee populations provided valuable intelligence about species that humanity might need to understand in the future. Lieutenant, I need detailed medical scans of all refugee populations, Beth instructed while maintaining her cover as a concerned relief coordinator. We need to understand their nutritional requirements and medical needs to provide appropriate care. What she didn't mention was that this data would also reveal biological vulnerabilities that could be exploited if these species ever became hostile to human interests. The efficiency of the human relief operations impressed and confused the other species working in the camps. While alien aid organizations struggled with bureaucratic delays and resource allocation problems, human teams seemed to anticipate needs before they became critical. Food appeared where it was needed, medical supplies arrived at overcrowded hospitals, and transportation was arranged with mysterious effectiveness. Dr. Ann Walsh had arrived at the Red Rock facility 3 days earlier, ostensibly to provide xenobiological expertise for treating injured aliens. Her real mission was to collect tissue samples and genetic material from as many different species as possible. The chaos of the medical emergency provided perfect cover for gathering intelligence that would normally take years to obtain. The ironclad refugees are showing signs of metal poisoning from their damaged life support systems, Anne reported during a staff meeting. I'll need to run extensive tests to develop appropriate treatments. Those tests would also provide detailed analysis of ironclad physiology that could inform the development of species-specific weapons if future conflicts arose. Beth noticed that other aid organizations were beginning to comment on the unusual resources that humans seemed to possess. The Skyborn medical teams wondered how human supply ships could carry such diverse equipment for treating so many different alien physiologies. The Rootkin logistics coordinators questioned how human personnel could work such long hours without apparent fatigue. The secret lay in the true nature of the human merchant fleet that had been operating throughout Council space for decades. These vessels, disguised as commercial traders and research ships, were actually forward supply bases equipped with everything needed to support large-scale military operations. Their crews were trained soldiers maintaining deep cover as civilian. Contractors Admiral Frank Cross reviewed the intelligence reports streaming in from assets like Beth and Anne while standing in the command center of Luna Base, humanity's primary military installation hidden on the far side of Earth's moon. The facility, carved into kilometers of lunar rock and shielded from detection, had been under construction for 40 years. The Devourer bioships show consistent vulnerability to kinetic impact weapons, reported General Lisa Park, head of Xenobiology, Warfare Division. Their adaptive armor can absorb and redirect energy, but physical projectiles appear to cause irreparable damage to their organic systems. This intelligence had been gathered by observing the destruction of Council fleets and analyzing the wreckage. The data collected by human assets throughout refugee camps was being processed by artificial intelligence systems that looked for patterns in alien behavior, social structures, and technological dependencies. Every conversation recorded, every biological sample analyzed, and every social interaction observed contributed to humanity's understanding of potential allies and enemies. Sir, Operation Shepherd teams report full deployment across all Council territories, announced Captain Mike Johnson from the communications console. All assets are in position and awaiting activation orders. The relief workers and medical personnel scattered throughout refugee camps were actually advanced reconnaissance teams preparing for military operations. Beth received new orders through her encrypted communicator while distributing food supplies to hungry wetland children. The message was brief but significant. Shepherds transitioned to wolves in 18 hours. Maintain covers until activation. The time for gathering intelligence was ending, and the time for action was approaching throughout human-controlled space. Similar preparations were reaching their final stages. Mining facilities revealed hidden weapons, manufacturing capabilities. Research stations began producing military-grade equipment, and merchant vessels started shedding their civilian disguises to reveal their true nature as advanced warships. Refugee populations had no idea that their saviors were simultaneously preparing for warfare on a scale that would dwarf the Devourer attacks. The same human personnel who treated their injuries and fed their families were also cataloging their weaknesses and preparing contingency plans for future conflicts. Anne made her final report while packing her medical equipment. Genetic analysis, complete on 37 species. Physiological vulnerabilities identified and documented. Social structure assessments indicate optimal pressure points for psychological warfare if needed. Recommend immediate transition to next phase. The efficiency that had impressed alien observers during the relief operations was about to be revealed as something far more dangerous. Every act of humanitarian kindness had been carefully calculated to serve multiple purposes, and the trust earned through helping refugees would soon become a strategic advantage in the coming war. As night fell on Red Rock, Beth stood watching, the last transport ships departing with evacuated refugees. In 18 hours, these same ships would return carrying an invasion force that would demonstrate humanity's true capabilities. The galaxy was about to learn why the Council had originally feared Earth enough to restrict their expansion kernel. Beth Stone's final transmission before abandoning her humanitarian cover was received by every human asset across Council space. Operation Shepherd concludes successfully. Intelligence gathering complete. All units prepare for Operation Cerberus. Time to show them what humans do when the gloves come off. The fortress world of Bastion had never been intended to serve as the last refuge of galactic civilization. Built centuries ago as a strategic waypoint between major trade routes, the heavily fortified planet now housed the desperate remnants of the Galactic Council and nearly 1 billion refugees from consumed worlds. Captain Laura Hunt stood on the bridge of what appeared to be a standard human medical frigate, watching through the view screen as Devourer bioships formed an ever-tightening ring around Bastion. The organic vessels pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to mock the desperation of the trapped populations below. "Ma'am, the Council's defense platforms are preparing for their final stand," reported her tactical officer, Lieutenant Gary White. "Admiral Reth is requesting all available vessels to join the defensive perimeter." What the Council didn't know was that Laura's medical frigate was actually the advanced scout for the largest military operation in human history. The Council's last-ditch defensive strategy involved using Bastion's planetary shields to buy time for a massive coordinated strike against the Devourer command vessel. Every remaining warship from dozens of species had been gathered for one desperate assault that would either break the siege or result in the complete extinction of organized galactic civilization. Laura activated her ship's true communication array, a system far more sophisticated than anything the Council believed humans possessed. "Phoenix Command, this is Shepard 1. Target confirmation complete. All enemy positions logged and analyzed. Request immediate deployment of primary assets." The response came not from Earth but from Admiral Frank Cross aboard the command vessel, Terra's Wrath, hidden just outside the system's sensor range along with the rest of humanity's true fleet. "Shepard 1, maintain observation position. Primary fleet jumping to combat formation in 60 seconds. Operation Cerberus is go." On Bastion's surface, David Chen sat in the emergency council chambers watching the final preparations for what everyone believed would be the last battle of their civilization. Representatives from surviving species argued desperately about evacuation priorities, while military leaders coordinated what they knew was a hopeless final assault. "The Devourer command vessel has grown to twice the size of our largest dreadnought," Admiral Reth announced to the assembled delegates. "Our combined fleet numbers just over 400 ships against their estimated 600 biovessels. The mathematics of this engagement are not favorable." David quietly activated his personal communicator and sent a brief message. "Council requests immediate human assistance. Recommend full disclosure and direct intervention." The response from Earth Command was equally brief. "Disclosure authorized. Show them what they restricted." The first sign that something had changed came from the long-range sensors monitoring the system's edge. Massive energy signatures began appearing in formations that defied every known principle of galactic military doctrine. Instead of the traditional squadron arrangements favored by Council forces, these new contacts moved in coordinated swarms that suggested a completely different approach to space combat. Unknown contacts approaching from Vector 77 Mark 12, announced the Skyborn sensor operator, his voice rising with excitement. Energy signatures are off the charts. I count over 300 vessels of unknown configuration. Admiral Reth studied the tactical display with growing confusion. The approaching fleet wasn't following any recognizable attack pattern. Instead of maintaining safe distances and forming battle lines, the unknown ships were accelerating directly toward the Devourer formation, with apparent disregard for conventional tactical wisdom. Captain Laura Hunt smiled as she watched the Council's confusion through her observation sensors. All units, this is Phoenix Leader. Begin Revelation Protocol. Show them who we really are. Throughout the system, dozens of civilian human vessels began shedding their disguises and revealing advanced weapon systems. The transformation was spectacular as mining ships extended hidden missile batteries, research vessels deployed experimental energy weapons, and medical frigates like Laura's revealed their true nature as advanced stealth cruisers. Every human presence in Council space had been a carefully maintained deception by the ancestors, Admiral Reth whispered, as his sensors registered the true capabilities of the vessels he had dismissed as harmless human support craft. Those energy readings indicate weapons technology decades ahead of our most advanced systems. The main human fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their sleek vessels moving with precision that made even the disciplined ironclad formations look clumsy. Unlike the ceremonial designs favored by Council species, these ships were built for pure functionality, with every line optimized for combat effectiveness. Captain Laura Hunt opened communication channels to the Council. Command Center. Bastion Control. This is Captain Laura Hunt of the United Human Space Force. We are here to resolve your Devourer situation. All Council forces are ordered to withdraw to minimum safe distance immediately. The silence that followed her transmission lasted nearly 30 seconds before Admiral Reth found his voice. Captain Hunt, did you say United Human Space Force? Our records indicate that humanity possesses only a token patrol fleet. The energy signatures we're reading suggest otherwise. Admiral, humanity has been preparing for this day for 50 years. Laura replied calmly. The Council's restrictions gave us both motivation and opportunity to develop capabilities beyond your current understanding. I suggest you observe and learn. The Devourer bioships began moving toward the human fleet with the same predatory confidence they had shown throughout their conquest. Their organic hulls pulsed with anticipation as they prepared to absorb the energy weapons that had fed their growth throughout the war. What happened next redefined galactic warfare. The human ships opened fire not with energy beams but with streams of kinetic projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed. The impacts against Devourer bioships caused massive structural damage that the organic hulls could not adapt to or absorb. Impossible, breathed General Pike of the Ironclad as he watched human weapons tear through enemies that had shrugged off his people's most powerful energy cannons. Kinetic weapons at those velocities should be impossible to achieve with conventional propulsion systems. The human fleet demonstrated tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Instead of honorable single combat between individual vessels, they attacked in coordinated swarms that overwhelmed enemy defenses through sheer volume of fire. Multiple human ships would target a single Devourer vessel until it was completely destroyed before moving to the next target. Admiral Frank Cross's voice cut through the tactical communications network with authority that made even seasoned Council military leaders straighten unconsciously. This is Admiral Frank Cross of Earth Defense Command. Council forces will maintain current positions while human units eliminate the threat. Any interference will be considered hostile action. For the first time since the war began, Devourer bioships began attempting to retreat as human weapons proved not just effective, but devastating. The organic hulls that had absorbed energy weapons like sponges were torn apart by kinetic impacts that no amount of biological adaptation could. Counter David Chen stood up in the Council chambers as representatives watched the impossible unfold on their tactical displays. Honored delegates, I believe formal introductions are now in order. Earth withdraws its acceptance of restricted status within this Council. Humanity hereby petitions for full membership with all associated rights and responsibilities. The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. The species they had restricted and dismissed had just demonstrated military capabilities that surpassed the combined might of the entire Galactic Council. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted permanently, and everyone knew it. The space around Bastion erupted into controlled chaos as the human fleet demonstrated why the Council had originally feared Earth enough to impose restrictions. Captain Laura Hunt coordinated her squadron through tactical movements that treated three-dimensional space like a carefully choreographed dance of destruction. Admiral Frank Cross watched the battle unfold from his command position aboard Terra's Wrath, his seasoned eyes tracking dozens of engagements simultaneously. Unlike the individual duels favored by Council military doctrine, human forces operated as a unified organism, where every ship's actions supported the overall tactical objective. Target priorities: command vessels first, support clusters second, stragglers last, Cross announced through the fleet-wide communication network. Remember, we're not here to fight honorably. We're here to win efficiently, minimize ammunition expenditure, and maximize enemy casualties. The Devourer bioships, which had adapted to counter every weapon the Council possessed, found themselves facing something entirely different. Human kinetic weapons struck with the force of small asteroids, causing massive structural damage that organic systems could neither absorb nor repair. Each impact created cascading failures throughout the bioship's living structures that spread like infections through their organic hulls. Captain Laura Hunt's frigate, Silent Storm, demonstrated the efficiency of human small unit tactics as her squadron of 8 vessels systematically dismantled a Devourer cluster that outnumbered them 3-1. "Focus fire on structural weak points," she commanded, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had trained for this moment her entire career. "Target the neural pathways between sections. When they lose coordination, they lose everything." The Council observers watching from Bastion's command center struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing. Admiral Reth's tactical displays showed human ships moving in formations that seemed to violate physics, coordinating attacks with precision that suggested either incredible training or some form of shared consciousness. "How are they achieving that level of coordination?" General Pike asked, his metallic voice tinged with something that might have been fear. "Our best squadrons require constant communication to maintain formation integrity, but these humans seem to anticipate each other's movements." The answer lay in humanity's approach to warfare as a science rather than an art. Every human pilot had undergone years of simulation training against exactly this scenario. They had studied Devourer tactics from the archived data, developed counters to their adaptive capabilities, and practiced coordinated maneuvers until they became instinctive. The largest Devourer bioship, a creature that dwarfed even the Council's greatest dreadnoughts, attempted to use its signature feeding attack against Admiral Cross's flagship. Massive organic tentacles extended toward Terra's Wrath, with the intention of beginning the consumption process that had destroyed hundreds of Council vessels. "All batteries, target the extending appendages," Cross ordered with the calm demeanor of someone following a well-rehearsed plan. "Nuclear warheads, proximity detonation. Show this thing what happens when it tries to eat a human warship." The nuclear explosions that followed lit up the space around Bastion like artificial stars. The Devourer command vessel recoiled as its feeding tentacles were severed by atomic fire, leaving it vulnerable to the concentrated kinetic barrage that followed. Human weapons found their mark with devastating precision, tearing through organic armor that had previously seemed invincible. Throughout the battle, human forces demonstrated tactical innovations that redefined space combat. They used their superior speed and coordination to isolate individual Devourer vessels before overwhelming them with concentrated firepower. When bioships attempted to adapt to human weapons, the humans simply switched to different ammunition types or attack vectors. Dr. Ann Walsh monitored the biological analysis of Devourer remains from her position aboard the medical vessel. "Healing. Light. The organic matrix is breaking down faster than it can regenerate," she reported. Kinetic trauma appears to disrupt their cellular regeneration at the molecular level. They literally cannot heal fast enough to survive our weapons. The tide of battle turned definitively when human forces began using what Admiral Cross called saturation tactics, coordinated strikes that delivered more kinetic energy than the bioships could possibly absorb or deflect. Entire Devourer formations were reduced to drifting organic debris within minutes. Captain Laura Hunt's sensors detected the first signs of enemy retreat as the surviving Devourer vessels began attempting to disengage from combat. "Admiral, enemy forces are trying to withdraw. Should we pursue and eliminate the remaining targets?" "Negative, Captain Hunt," Cross replied after a moment's consideration. "Let some of them escape. We want word of this engagement to reach whatever masters control these creatures. Fear is often more effective than complete destruction." The council representatives watched in stunned silence as the Devourer fleet that had consumed dozens of worlds was systematically destroyed by forces they had dismissed as primitive. The bioships that survived the encounter fled into deep space, their retreat so rapid it suggested genuine terror rather than tactical withdrawal. As the last enemy vessel disappeared into the void, Admiral Cross opened a communication channel to Bastion Command. "Council Command, this is Admiral Cross of Earth Defense Command. The immediate threat has been neutralized. Human forces are standing by for further orders from properly constituted galactic authority." The silence that followed lasted nearly 2 minutes before Admiral Reth found his voice. "Admiral Cross, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I must ask, exactly how long has humanity possessed these military capabilities?" "Longer than you might prefer to know, Admiral Reth," Cross replied diplomatically. "Earth has been preparing for scenarios like this since our first contact with galactic civilization. Your restrictions gave us both the motivation and the time necessary to develop appropriate responses to existential threats." David Chen chose that moment to stand in the council chambers, his quiet voice carrying clearly through the assembly hall. "Honored delegates, I believe circumstances have changed sufficiently to warrant a revision of humanity's status within this council. Earth formally requests full membership with all associated rights, privileges, and responsibilities." The chamber remained silent as representatives from dozens of species contemplated the new reality. The restricted species they had condescended to for 50 years had just demonstrated military capabilities that exceeded their combined strength. The balance of galactic power had shifted permanently. General Pike was the first to speak, his mechanical voice unusually subdued. "Representative Chen, I believe I speak for many when I say that humanity's request for full council membership should be considered with all appropriate speed and favorable disposition." Admiral Cross's final transmission to the council carried an undertone that everyone recognized but no one dared acknowledge. "Earth looks forward to working with our galactic neighbors to ensure that threats like the Devourers never again endanger civilized space. We trust that future cooperation will be both productive and mutually beneficial." The unspoken message was clear to everyone present. The galaxy now had a new dominant power, and the Council would either adapt to this reality or find themselves facing the same efficient destruction that had just befallen the Devourers. Humanity had finally revealed its true nature, and the stars would never be the same.